Okay, I think we are just about set to begin. Greetings again, everyone. I'm Meyer Semiatiki at the Faculty of Arts Young Workers' Rights Hub at X University in downtown Toronto. The Hub's mission is to promote student and young workers' well-being at work. Specifically, we aim to advance young workers' understanding of their rights on the job, how to exercise them, and how to expand them. Today's webinar focuses on the challenges of working in the gig economy. We begin with an acknowledgement of the land we live on and what we owe its first peoples. Canadians live on Indigenous land. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. Its first inhabitants were Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee. Recent weeks have brought us horrific reminder of the devastating impact colonialism has had on Indigenous children, families, and communities in this country. I'm referring, of course, to the discovery of unmarked remains of 215 children who attended the Kamloops, British Columbia residential school. And we also know that Kamloops was not an isolated case. Many deaths of children happened at residential schools across Canada. We need to acknowledge the damage and wrongs that settler society colonialism has inflicted on Indigenous peoples. We need concrete action that matches our responsibility for evils done in Canada's name. I urge myself and all of us to play a part in advancing justice for Indigenous nations and peoples. And now on to our topic for today and our speaker. More and more people now work in the gig economy. They perform app-based work dependent on a tech platform and its algorithms. The gig economy began with great promise of a new world of work, flexible work, everyone their own boss, good earnings, and work-life balance for all. A decade later, the picture is far less rosy. Many gig workers complain of limited earnings, unsafe work, and taking orders from their online app. You may also have heard that last year, DoorDash, the food delivery gig company, paid its CEO a whopping compensation package of $414 million. Fortunes are clearly being made in the gig economy. Are gig workers getting their fair share? Discussing that with us today, we have Jennifer Scott. Jennifer is the president of Gig Workers United in Toronto. The organization brings together app-based delivery workers to push for fairness for gig workers. Our format will be as follows. Jennifer will speak for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll go into Q&A. Please do post any questions you have for Jennifer in the chat function. This session is being recorded, and I would ask all participants to please mute yourselves. And now over to you, Jennifer Scott. Thank you so much for leading this discussion.
Thank you so much for hosting a place for us to talk about gig work. I was especially pleased to hear that this was, sort of under the format of a Know Your Rights workshop. I think a lot of us, regardless of what industry we work in, don't have a lot of knowledge about unionizing and what that means for us and why it's important. But to start with the gig economy, to kind of have us just make sure we're on the same page with a few things. So gig work can appear, like the definition of like what is gig work can seem confusing. Gig work, generally speaking, is work where you are paid to complete a small task. I work for Uber Eats on my bicycle, so I am paid to deliver from one restaurant to a customer. I am classified as an independent contractor as opposed to dependent contractor employee. And generally speaking, all gig workers have a form of classification that is not an employee classification, which results in having limited or no rights as a worker, and of course, no opportunity for recourse when we experience egregious things in the workplace. Gig workers, and at Gig Workers United, we are a union that represents gig workers who deliver things on apps. So whether that's Uber Eats, DoorDash, Skip the Dishes, or folks who do grocery shop and grocery delivery like Corner Shop and Instacart, as well as folks who do Amazon Flex. If you deliver on an app, you are a gig worker in our union if you want to be. But gig work, and part of the reason that it's important to have this conversation, and the more technical, darker part of where a conversation is going to go later, is that gig work is not exclusive to Uber Eats. It's not exclusive to food delivery or rideshare. Over the past few years, we've seen gig work standards begin to move into other industries like tech and education, especially throughout the pandemic, with a lot of remote teaching beginning to mimic some of the standards of gig work in healthcare. For a very long time, truck drivers were misclassified as independent contractors, and I would say also be gig workers. Many still are. Sex work is a form of gig work. It is within like the limelight. When we talk about it, we talk about the form of gig work that I do, but it is a very large part of work, and work that is available particularly to younger people who are exiting post-secondary education. For me, being a gig worker means that, I got my job, I received no training, I have no safety equipment. I have no access to something like a joint health and safety committee, which many folks are entitled to in their workplaces. I have no control over my pay. I can't negotiate for a raise or a decrease in pay if I wanted to. I don't have a say when my wage changes, and I have no guaranteed wage, not even like a minimum wage. I receive no support if I'm injured at work, no sick days, no WSIB, nothing. I have no advocacy within my workplace. As an example, throughout this pandemic, people like me who have been delivering food, groceries, and providing rideshare services have not been able to access bathrooms while we are working. I have a friend here in the union who delivers in her car, and so she purchased adult diapers so that she could work because there are no bathrooms. And we do not have the ability to advocate for ourselves with our boss to change that. And that turns into no accountability. So when we experience things like wage theft or discrimination or unlawful termination, there is very little that we can do about that. Many of us are fired, which, the term we would use for that is deactivated. We can be deactivated at any time, no explanation, very limited and very obscure appeals process, and of course, no severance pay. And there is no structure that exists either within my relationship to my employer and my contract, or within the parameters of labor legislation in this province to allow me to hold my employer accountable for all of these things. And a lot of that stuff, what that really sort of translates into and what it means is that my employer very much controls the conditions of my work. And we'll get to why that's important a little bit later. Misclassification is, you can't talk about the gig economy without talking about misclassification. And so I'm going to share with you, actually, we'll do that later. So generally speaking, misclassification means that the employer has chosen to make profit by classifying their employees as a form of worker that is not entitled to things like minimum wage, CPP payments, stuff like that. And they do that because they make money and they have less accountability to the workers. And when we talk about the gig economy and the problems in the gig economy, as much as apps and folks who are sympathetic to apps might like to have us believe that that misclassification cannot be reconciled, it is absolutely the thing to reconcile. The purpose of a lot of the work that app employers are doing is to secure wins that are in line with misclassification and what that does for workers. Before I was president of Gig Workers United, I was part of Foodsters United, which was a union campaign here in Toronto, a grassroots union campaign led by gig workers who worked for the app Foodora. We partnered with CUPW, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. We did a ton of on-the-ground grassroots organizing amongst our coworkers. And we filed an application to unionize. And so this is a really big deal because in Ontario, independent contractors are not entitled to unionize. We are currently entitled to the right to prove at the Labor Board and in court that we are not independent contractors. And that's what we did with Foodora and with Foodsters United. And we won that. And winning that, we were the first group of gig workers within our version of the gig economy in Canada to win this challenge. We are not independent contractors, we are dependent contractors. We are a form of worker who's entitled to rights. It is precedent setting. And it's something that will help other gig workers, regardless of their industry, in the future if they want to unionize. Later in the pandemic, so in 2020, a lot of things happened. So February 25th, we win the right to unionize. Amazing, the year starting off great. The pandemic hits, and because we've won the right to unionize, there's a high likelihood that we're going to win our union, right? And Foodora declared bankruptcy and exited the Canadian market. And so at the very beginning of the pandemic, we all lost our jobs. We were not happy about that. We held a rally in front of the Foodora office to talk about that. There were maybe 100 of us who came. And not long after that, we got to unseal the ballot box, which is kind of a big deal. When you do a union campaign, sometimes it takes a long time. But when we did that, we learned that 88.6% of Foodora workers in Toronto and Mississauga voted yes for a union. And that is incredibly high for any union, let alone a gig workers union. This is from our protest. We were not satisfied with having no jobs in a pandemic. Many of us did not qualify for CERB. There was no commitment and no guarantee from either the provincial or federal governments that Foodora declaring bankruptcy would allow us to qualify. And so we created a hardship fund because a lot of good work that's done within unions is done within the scope of, we are not just fighting for labor protections. We are fighting to change and fix the gaps in our lives that are caused by the larger social oppression we all experience. And so we ran a hardship fund for maybe 10 months, raising money for gig workers who were injured, who lost their jobs, who struggled to be able to stay on the road and keep working if they had a job with another app. While we were doing that, we were pursuing a settlement with Foodora. On the day that Foodora declared bankruptcy in Canada, they sent that email at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and at about 1:15 in the morning, because like I did not sleep, I could not sleep. At about 1:15 in the morning, the CEO of Delivery Hero, which is like the company, the parent company that owns Foodora, announced on Twitter a celebration of the highest first quarterly profits in the company's history, and that was a profit of 115 billion euros. So Delivery Hero paid us a settlement of $3.46 million. That money did not go only to gig workers who were part of Foodsters United. It went to every Foodora courier in Canada who qualified for it. And anyone who had worked within the last 8 months would have qualified for some form of it. It's a huge win. I'll share this link with you later. Sarah from the Toronto Star did a podcast about us, and you can learn a lot more about our work if you listen to it, and a lot more about the gig economy. When Foodora left, we had a certified union. We fought for one, we won it, and it was very bittersweet because Foodora left and we lost it. We were not prepared to let that go. And so we created Gig Workers United, which is a lot different from Foodsters United. We are still in a labor partnership with CUPW. However, we are a community union, which I don't think there's been one in Toronto for a long time. A community union is a little bit different than a traditional union. It means that we have more flexibility to do that work of filling the voids and fixing the gaps in our lives due to the larger oppression that we experience. Certainly, we still reconcile labor issues, but how can we also make living today better? Knowing that the majority of gig workers here are migrant workers and international students, what things can we fight for that make their experience in Canada with Canada's racist immigration system better? I think we have a big future ahead of us. But let's talk about gig work and gig work organizing and gig work unionizing is absolutely at the forefront of the labor movement. And here in Canada, currently, the people who are part of Gig Workers United are holding the line against one of the most regressive labor policies that has ever come forward for everybody in Canada, not just for gig workers. It's called Flex Plus, and Uber has brought it forward. Flex Plus is a petition to the provincial and federal governments to change worker classification, like in regards to the labor law. And so we can take a look at this. So currently, on the right-hand side of my slide there, currently workers in Ontario are classified as independent contractors, dependent contractors, or employees. And if you wanted to learn more about that, laws such as the Employment Standards Act, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Human Rights Code, and the Labor Relations Act to a lesser degree define the relationship between workers and their employers, and also the differences between those classifications of worker. On the right or left-hand side of my slide, I have an excerpt from a push notification that Uber sent me. I mean, they sent it to all workers, but in it, what they're telling me is that they say, we believe a better way to work is possible, offering flexibility when you want it and support when you need it. By advocating for change with governments, we can set a new standard that combines the freedom of independent work with new benefits and protections. So Uber is petitioning the government to create a new classification of worker. It looks like it would sit somewhere between independent contractor and dependent contractor. And where I talked about misclassification earlier, when employers misclassify their workers and the workers try to do like what we did with Foodsters United and prove that they are misclassified, the labor board has certain standards that they have to look at to determine who is right. A lot of those things that I talked about, the fact that I am not provided with any safety equipment. The reason that I'm not provided with safety equipment is because if I were, as a worker who wants to unionize, that would give me ammunition to say, to demonstrate that I'm not an independent contractor. And so what Uber is doing is trying to reduce as much as they can the power that workers have, as much as they can to take away our right to organize. And they are selling it to us as something that's good for us. In order to raise the standard for app-based work for all, government and businesses need to work together. That's why we created a proposal to help people who earn through app-based work receive more security, protection, and transparency. This is what Uber is telling the workers Flex Plus will bring us. Instead of paying into a Canada pension plan, instead of paying into my taxes, I will get a self-directed benefits fund. That is a fund of money that Uber will hold, an amount of money that they will determine based on how much I work and how much I earn. And I will have the ability to choose to spend that money on something like a sick day or going to the dentist or my retirement. A lot of this stuff is really easy to see sort of the red flags in it. Uber says here, leading the way on change and improving worker representation. We are committed to engaging more with drivers and delivery people so that everyone on our platform feels better represented. And I suspect you all see what I do, and to feel something is not the same as to be something. I don't want to feel represented in my workplace. I want to be represented and have accountability. And that is very much what Flex Plus is. To talk about that a little bit more, when Uber came to Canada in 2016, they did exactly the same thing. It's just repetition of a pattern that worked. They wanted to do ride sharing, and they wanted to operate in a way that was in violation of local, municipal, or provincial legislation. And so they petitioned each municipality or province, depending on the rules, to make changes to accommodate them. Some wins, some losses, some stalemates, but eventually over time, wins across the board. And when they did that, they did it with like, you know, this is what we want, the underlying thing of changing the law. But the piece that was on the surface, the piece that people saw who were not gig workers, was that piece about misclassification. Gig workers are gig workers. They're not real workers. They're not real people. It's just a job. It's just a gig. They don't need rights. They don't, you know, and so Uber needs to operate in this way so that gig workers can have the misclassification that they want. What Uber is doing with Flex Plus by creating a new classification of worker, a classification of worker that has nothing guaranteed to them, no accountability outlined for them, and a type of worker that would lose the right to unionize, which is something that has not existed in Canada. Across the board, every province, our country acknowledges that all workers have the right to unionize, and Flex Plus classification would take that away. That's not a piece of law that would only apply to Uber workers. Certainly in the immediate, it would apply to everyone who works as a gig worker in my industry. But how long would it take for that to begin to apply to people who work in journalism or in those other industries where gig work is becoming more and more predominant? In California, when Prop 22 was passed, which was a bill that Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash paid $240 million to write, there was a grocery delivery company. They had unionized workers who packed up the groceries and delivered them. The day after Prop 22 passed, they fired all of the unionized workers and rehired anyone who wanted to work for them as a gig worker under similar terms to working for DoorDash. I think this is the future for people who work in Canada if Flex Plus is passed. It is not specific for us, and it will not take very long for gig work and the harms and violences that gig workers experience at work to begin to move into other industries. But we are workers with a union, and workers always are more powerful than the boss. If you are a gig worker, if you know gig workers, being part of the union matters. It is currently Gig Workers United and the Uber drivers who have partnered with UFCW, who are holding this line and fighting regressive policy for everybody in this province. That is where we stand. That is the future. And as we go into summer, as we come out of lockdown, the people who are doing that fight are people who are primarily migrant workers and international students, people who are very low income. In August of 2020, Uber cut our pay by 60%. The average order in downtown Toronto is $3. And because so many people came to our industry during the pandemic, we have such a saturated workforce. In the summertime, we always see a decline in orders, but coming out of lockdown, we see a bit of an overcompensation. You know, I don't want to order Uber. I want to go to the park with my friends. And so lots of people feel that way. And we see a huge decrease in the amount of orders. So I worked on the weekend. I worked for 4 hours. I got sent 11 orders. and Uber paid me $3 for each order. And if I made more than $9 per hour, then it was because of tips. That is unacceptable. But it is people like me, people who are earning these very low wages, people who do not have PR in Canada and who throughout the pandemic have been refused PR or acknowledgement of how long it will take for them to get it. It is racialized people, women and trans people who are holding this line and who are protecting work and jobs for everybody. It's a really big fight. Uber is one of the most evil companies in the world. And you know, I understand that a lot of the reason that you're here is because you care about advocacy, you care about seeing positive changes. And so I'd like to talk about that and what you can do. If you are a gig worker, you should join the union. And I would love to talk to you about that. If you know gig workers, you should talk to them about that. If you are not a gig worker and you want to be an ally, then there are significant and meaningful ways that you can support gig workers. On our website and through newsletters coming out this summer, there will be a ton of tasks, a ton of things that you can participate in. Order in days are an opportunity for you to place an order and tip a worker and make sure they get a good wage for that hour, while also taking some time to talk to them with the support of like educational documents you would get from us about the union and about your support for and your acknowledgement of the difficulty of their work. As we see the provincial government table ideas about Flex Plus, there will be opportunities to put pressure on your MPPs and other folks you may have connections with to ensure that the legislation that is passed is legislation that is supportive and literally anything else, like literally any version of good for gig workers and for workers. We have a continuous hardship fund that is running. And if you have the ability, donating to the hardship fund is a great way to support gig workers. But primarily, if you have a job, if you are a worker and you are not unionized, the best thing that you can do, the best way to counter capitalism, the best way to counter regressive labor policy is to unionize your workplace. Should we talk a little bit? Do folks have questions?
Thank you, Jennifer, for that very interesting, spirited presentation on work and unionization in the gig economy. So we are open for questions, and I am now going to, I see some applause from members of the audience for that presentation of yours, Jennifer. And I'm going to turn moderation of the Q&A over to Joselle Gerardo, who is a recent graduate from X University. And Joselle, over to you.
Thank you, Meyer, and thank you, Jennifer, for your presentation. I think now we are coming out of this this webinar with more information as to how we can better advocate and how we can join you during the summer on those tons of tasks that you have mentioned earlier. I think the first question that we have is, what are the benefits of unionizing?
Yeah, so there are so many. And there are two versions, okay? You have the community part. And I mean, like, you know, your union and the community or the quality of your union is determined by the people who are in it. And so you as a worker, you determine the quality of your union. You determine what the community of your union is like. That's the best part about them. The union is run by and moved by the workers. So if you want something to happen, if you want something to change, your union is the place that you go to make that happen, and to make that happen with a whole bunch of people who will have your back. If you experience gregarious things at work, if you experience even different kinds of oppression in your life that relate to work, your union is the place to go to have lawyers and stewards and representatives who have experience fighting those things have your back and help you win things like, say, a claim for wage theft. Wage theft on your own is really hard to fight, but with a union behind you, wage theft is very easy to win. If you're terminated unfairly on your own, it's really hard to do something about that. But with all of your coworkers, even like 90% of your coworkers, going to your boss, to your employer and saying, no, 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 you cannot fire our comrade. They did nothing wrong. You have power. Unions allow workers to change the power dynamic within the relationship of their employment. They allow you to dictate to a significant degree what that power dynamic is. And, you know, I mean, that stuff is so much fun if you're strategic, if you like being like a little bit creative, if you like being a little bit on the edge, that stuff is fun. Also, you know, I don't know how you feel, but capitalism is kind of rough. I'm not really having a good time. And for so long as we live within the confines of capitalism, unions are the only tool that working class people have to fight back within that structure.
Thank you, Jennifer. As a former politics student, I know all about capitalism. Next question is, when young workers, especially recent graduates, they're coming out of university, coming out of college, really not sure as to what the next steps are, especially if they're gig workers. How can young workers join Gig Workers United or other unions? I think that's a very confusing process for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're young and you're coming out of school, you're probably going to do some form of gig work. There are some kinds that are better than others, but that's probably going to be the reality. And I would say first off, knowing that you have rights and you have the ability to assert those rights if you can build power. Certainly, a union is a way to do that. There are also ways to do that without one if you're good at organizing and you've got good coworkers. Gig Workers United is quite progressive. And so the barriers for membership are very low. So we acknowledge that gig workers are people who work in all kinds of vehicles on all different apps, sometimes not even on our own apps. If you do gig work, if you deliver on an app and you want to be part of Gig Workers United, then you can. And it's as simple as that. Not all unions are like that. But if you have a job and your workplace is unionized, you'll sign a union card when you begin your employment, and you'll get information about who your shop steward is. And that's somebody you should look for. It's someone whose job it is to provide you with information and help you connect with the things that are going on in your union. And if you don't have a union in your workplace, then you should unionize your workplace. And if you want to do that, there are tons of great resources. They're not all easy to find. And I would say maybe the easiest and best way to get started is to reach out to people who are or have unionized or are part of unions, maybe executives of locals, you know, like say a president of a union local in Toronto in an industry that's similar to yours, and ask for support and solidarity and some direction and maybe connections with educational materials. The IWW can be a good resource for like finding information and reading and learning. Jane McAlevey is relatively well known. She has published a number of books. No Shortcuts is a very good one on how to organize a union and how to win a union drive. But the biggest thing is to know that you have rights and to know that if you build power, you will win. The workers always win if they build power and they are united. So talk to your coworkers, have honest and open conversations safely so you don't get in trouble, and slowly build and learn. One of the really big things that I say a lot that I love to say is like, you know, now in 2021, we have a ton of resources and there are a ton of tools and paths and really big unions like CUPW and Steelworkers and UFCW who know how to unionize a workplace. They know the steps and the best way to do it to win. Before that existed, people unionized. They fought hard and they won big wins. And a lot of the things that we hold as labor standards are things that people won before big unions existed. If you have a group of coworkers, if you listen to each other, if you work collectively, if you learn collectively, problem solve collectively, you will know what to do. You will figure it out and it will work. And that's just like, in my opinion, that's just the lesson of labor organizing in history. It really is intimidating, but you'll know what to do and you'll figure it out.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your encouraging words. I think we need to hear more of that, especially now that workers are coming back, or like the recent reopening. I think that's going to bring in a lot of new struggles for many. The next question that we have is, what is the best course of action for consumers to push for better support for gig workers? And here's, I'm reading directly from their question, and I quote, "I recognize boycotting things like Uber and DoorDash would mean there isn't work available, which is bad. But I also worry about the amount of money from orders that go directly to the company rather than the workers. Is there any way around this catch-22? End quote.
So the gig economy is interesting. So I'm in my early 30s, and I grew up during this period of time where, you know, media and education taught me that I am a consumer, and as a consumer, I have power through the choices that I make about where I spend my money and also how I review the companies or the people that I spend my money with. And the gig economy manipulates that, I think, in ways that really harm the workers. And so as an example, I know this isn't directly related to your question, but I'm getting there. But as an example, in ride sharing, so when you use like an Uber taxi, you have the option to rate your driver. Now, we know from academic studies that those ratings are often discriminatory and based on personal biases, particularly racial biases. From the studies that we have here in Ontario, we see a lot of Islamophobia represented in those ratings. And those ratings directly relate to workers being terminated. Uber and all apps, Lyft, they know that, but they don't stop allowing consumers to impact whether or not someone has a job. And, you know, part of that is because they know that as consumers, we still feel what it was that I was taught when I was growing up, that we have power as consumers with our voices and our money. And frankly, we don't. There is no ethical consumption under capitalism, particularly late stage capitalism. What we do have, though, is collective organizing power. And so get a little bit creative. Do things like use the Uber app, use the DoorDash app, use Lyft. And because you have it downloaded in your phone, go write a review in the App Store about how you think that gig workers should be unionized. Uber has refused to acknowledge UFCW's union and has stalled the campaign at the labor board. Write a review about how that's fucked up and you don't support that. And when you use the services, with the exception of times when you experience violence or harm, if your ride is just okay, if your delivery spilled a little bit, still rate positively. You know, you have the ability, and it's something, it's a consequence that you'll never see, to terminate someone's employment and they can't do anything about it. And something like, you know, I spill coffee a lot when I deliver coffee. I work on a bike. I don't know what to say. I work on a bike, and you know, if I'm biking up Yonge to St. Clair from Bloor, it's gonna spill. And when people give me negative ratings for that, like I really can't do anything about that. Uber should not have that coffee be sent on a bike. And then when folks rate me negatively, that impacts my ability to maintain my job. So using your voice in a bigger way and in a way that uplifts and supports and mirrors what workers are saying. Reviews, like I said, in the App Store, support the workers, going to various like the websites or the, I posted earlier, like our Twitter, Instagram, stuff like that. Look for the messaging and the things that workers are saying and find ways when you use the apps to remind the apps that you support that. When Foodora, when we were in the Foodora campaign, customers had the ability to write a review at the end of the order, and they would review both the rider, the food, and then they could just review their general experience. And so we requested people, instead of reviewing your general experience, say, I support Foodsters United, you should acknowledge the union and not fight it. Those are big things that you can do. They are meaningful, they support the worker, and your message is heard. And the more people who participate in that kind of collective action, the bigger that it builds.
Thank you. I think we need to really spread the word more about the ways that you have mentioned, writing a review, writing positively, and looking for workers' messaging. I think that is very important. The next question is, besides the union approach, how do you evaluate other ways to fight the gig capitalism, like Ava, the cooperative approach?
I got so excited when I saw your question in the chat, because we did a lot of things when Foodora left Canada. We engaged in a lot of mutual aid. We tried to keep each other fed, and we decided to start a worker co-op. And so currently in Toronto, the Foodsters United co-op exists. It's a worker-owned co-op that does delivery, and at some point in the future will be a platform co-op that can challenge or take the same place as apps like Foodora, Uber, or Instacart doing on-demand delivery. And platform cooperativism, gig workers trying to exit the gig economy by creating sustainable and viable versions of that work with their extensive knowledge from doing that work, are actually really common. Shift in Vancouver is launching on-demand food delivery next week. There are 2 in Montreal. There are a whole bunch in the US. There is a really badass platform co-op for food delivery workers in Johannesburg in South Africa. And it was founded by a lot of the same people who led one of the very first international strikes against the pandemic pay cuts. They exist. This is a good alternative. The thing that's really important to know, though, is like, when we talk about the gig economy and the problem of the gig economy, it's more than just that the companies are not profitable and the wages are not good. It's that, Uber launched in 2009 on the heels of the end of the first economic crisis of my lifetime. And they created a business plan that makes workers precarious at a time when people, our communities were socially precarious. That is intentional. And we see again, during the pandemic, on the heels of the end of, what we hope is the end of this pandemic, we see Uber doing the same thing again, endeavoring to change labor law in this country, across the board in this country, in a way that will make workers precarious at a time when our communities are socially precarious. Cooperatives and worker cooperatives specifically are also another way to challenge capitalism. They're very good, yes, and they're an amazing alternative. And it is a way for gig workers to show what we know to be true, that this industry, this work is valuable and it can be profitable and it can be sustainable. But the question of the gig economy and what is the real purpose and why are apps not profitable is much darker. And it's a lot more about making wins and regressing labor standards and making huge profits for a very small amount of individual investors. And so I guess what I mean to say is the co-ops, yes, they're amazing. Support Foodsters United co-op. We'll have an Instagram soon, watch for that. If you're in Vancouver, use Shift. But at the same time, remember that there are 2 paths here, And one is, how do we support the workers? And the other one is pulling that veil back and seeing the long-term goals, the nefarious goals of the gig economy, and recognizing that that is separate from the value of the labor and the importance of the people who do that labor. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm just learning about this, the new good alternative that is available in other cities, and I hope I see one soon here in Toronto. That'll be very exciting. Next question is, I haven't communicated with my MP or MPP and I don't know how. What are the best ways to reach them to advocate for gig workers' rights?
Yes, I love that question. Thank you for asking that. Again, when we talk about things that are about workers' rights, the best way to advocate for workers is to uplift workers' voices and do what they ask you to. So if you follow us on Twitter, if you follow us on Instagram, if you follow me on Twitter, if you check our website with some regularity, you will see later this summer and into the fall that we will announce programs that will provide you with the tools and the information and even collective call-in days to contact your MPPs. Because you are right, it is confusing and intimidating and difficult to do that if you don't know how and if you never have. I don't think I will ever forget the first time I called my MPP. I doubt they could even hear me through the phone. I was so quiet. It was so intimidating. When we talk about collective, worker-driven, grassroots organizing, we want that to be organizing that allows people to learn and to grow. And so doing that in ways that are shared by I would assume what we would do is we'll have a Zoom link and everyone who wants to participate can jump in the Zoom and somebody like me will tell you about how easy it is and everything you can say. And then we'll all mute our Zooms and we'll all call at the same time. And so, I guess what I mean to say is it can be fun. It doesn't have to be scary. And when you want to do that, follow the workers, follow their voices, and wait until they ask you to, and then use the language that they ask you to use. And that is absolutely the most successful and supportive way to do that.
Thank you for that. I'm pretty sure there's already an advocate in the room that will be joining you this summer and the fall. You mentioned that there are tons of work to do during the summer, and now you say the fall with the union. Can you let us know what some of those work entail?
Yeah, so you can send us an email at info@gigworkersunited.ca. I put a bunch of ways you can contact us in my message in the chat. But we'll do outreach, order-in days, which are really fun, I think. So, and I guess this answers that earlier question too of how you can order and support. So an order-in day is like, we'll give you a packet with so much information in it, like so much. It'll tell you everything you need to do. But what you'll do is you'll place an order, and then you will, when your gig worker arrives with your order, you'll chat them up for a little bit, and we'll give you all the information you need to chat with them about. So you can talk about the union, or you can talk about their working conditions. You can tell them what you think and why you want to be an ally. And you can help them join the union by connecting them with information, or you can do something that is a very real form of solidarity, and that is give them a tip that ensures that they make a livable wage that hour if you can. I like order-in days. I think they are fun. You get to talk to people, and I've been part of the union, both Foodsters United and Gig Workers United, for long enough that I have met gig workers who came to the union because of order-in days, because the work is hard and the work is dehumanizing and it is sad a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time. And a moment where somebody says to you, hey, I'm proud of the work that you're doing a good job, means a lot, and it makes a significant impact. So I would offer throughout the summer, throughout the fall, that is a really great way to support and participate. When we have rallies, come to the rally. Again, those would be posted on the socials. We often do tent days. So we set up a tent and we'll have beverages and food, and we'll try and reach our coworkers. And that is very much an event for gig workers to connect with gig workers. However, to stop by and say hello, and I support what you're doing and you're doing a good job, and you know, wear your sunscreen and stay safe, it does make a difference, you know. If any of you have watched that movie Pride, which is a great unionizing movie, if you hadn't watched it, you should. There's a scene where one of the coal miners is speaking and he's talking about what it feels like to have solidarity. And he says that when you're in a big fight against, you know, a foe that's really big, it's scary and hard. And to find out that you have friends that you didn't know you have makes it feel a lot more comfortable and a lot easier and a lot more possible. And I think those things sometimes might seem small when we talk about them, but this work and this work of standing up for each other and caring about each other is very much care work. And things that you can do that show others that you support, that you recognize, that you see them, make big differences. Also, the Hardship Fund, if you can, and if you can't, sharing it with people who might be able to is also a way to support. Yeah, I think those are all good.
Thank you for that. I will definitely look out for those 10 days. That's definitely for me. We have a very short question. How much should we tip?
Well, my personal, you know, I always hate to answer that question because I'm going to tell you something really big because I'm just ridiculous like that. But my personal policy is when I tip, whether it's a restaurant or a gig worker, I tip them an amount of money that I know, even if I don't know exactly what their wage is, even if I don't know exactly how many other deliveries they got, how many other tables they had in the restaurant, I tip them an amount of money where I know it would be a reasonable wage. And so that might mean that I go to a restaurant, I order something that costs $20 and I tip $15. Like, that's a thing. I think that's class solidarity. If you're ordering from gig workers, if you're doing rideshare and you can do something like $5, $10, $15 tips, if it's a really big order, those make a big difference. That, you know, there have been times where I got a $15 tip and that meant that I could go home half an hour early on a day when it was negative 20 degrees out. And that makes a huge difference in the quality of my day. That doesn't, at the same time though, that doesn't mean you can always do that. And it doesn't mean you can afford to do that. And so we take that into consideration and we acknowledge that. And there are moments where we tip what we can, and we might want to tip more or feel like we should tip more and we can't, but we do what we can, and that is okay too.
Jennifer, I wonder if I can maybe jump in, Giselle, and exercise prerogative to ask a question or two verbally rather than through the chat. One thing I wonder, you mentioned earlier that your standard payment for a delivery by bike is $3 per order. The minimum wage in Ontario is $14.25 per hour at the moment. It would have been quite a lot higher had the current premier not frozen it a couple of years ago. But I guess my question is, can you do 5 deliveries in an hour to make basically minimum wage?
So to clarify, it's $3 is not even the base only for cyclists. That is the base across the board. So people who work in cars, who have to pay insurance and gas and the cost of the car, are also making $3 per delivery. But to answer your question, I've been a bike courier for 4 years on fast. And if there were enough orders and if they were good orders, could I do 5 orders an hour? Yes. However, when there are more workers than there are orders, when there is weather, when there is traffic, all of those things immediately lower that. And also, as an aside, if I do 5 deliveries an hour, no part of me bicycled in a way that is safe. Like, my mom is concerned, kind of thing. There are folks who do okay, and yeah, they make minimum wage or a bit more, and there are folks who don't. And the problem with that is that there is no control and no consistency. I can go out one day and I can make $100, and I can go out another day and make 15, and I might have been out for the exact same amount of time. It really can be and is that unpredictable. And that, of course, like we talked about, is to the profit and benefit of the app employers.
Mm. The other question I wondered about, Jennifer, is where young workers fit into the campaign and mobilization to advance gig workers' rights and to unionize. Obviously, the gig economy has workers across a very wide demographic. I mean, what's your impression about the role that young workers are playing? Are they into organizing and promoting the kind of collective action you're talking about? Is it a harder sell with young people to try to get them interested in that?
I hope there are young people in the room. I can't tell because you'll have your cameras off, and that's totally okay. But I hope there are young people in the room who hear me say this. But I'm 32, and I've been doing organizing almost all of my life. And not all union organizing, different kinds of organizing. And it is hard, and I am tired. And when I listen to younger people, when I see the content that they create, when I go to rallies and see them there in solidarity, I feel like it is not as hard and not as tiring. I feel like a second wave of comrades are stepping up and coming through. And I feel an incredible amount of excitement and possibility. It feels like something I have waited a long time for. I have a lot of faith in young people, and I am so excited to be part of what I think we will do with our future. Um, in regards to young people working in the gig economy, I think it is unrealistic to think that any young person in Canada will not work in the gig economy. Um, and I know that it's hard to come into a really shit job where you know it's not a good deal and you don't know how to fight for your rights, and unions seem big and you don't know about them. I know what that's like. And I would ask and offer trust and join and participate and um, learn and grow with us. We'll have your back and you'll have ours. And that's the way we make things better.
Thank you, Jennifer.
And now that our webinar is close to an end, and you have given us so much valuable information, and of course, the encouraging words that you have, especially for young people, what is one thing you would like young workers to know about the gig economy?
I think you need to take care of yourself. There are a lot of kinds of work that are gig work, where to earn enough or to feel like we are good, we have to push and hustle and work way harder than is physically healthy for our bodies and our minds. And that takes a consequence. And when you are young, you don't see that consequence immediately. I don't see the consequence of biking 60 hours a week right now. But I see my comrades who are 10 years older than I am, 15 years older than I am, who are sore, who have injuries that are permanent, who have struggles and difficulties with things that can't be undone. And so, yes, we make decisions that compromise our health and our well-being to survive, and that is unjust. And sometimes you will do that. But in the times when you don't have to, when you can make the decision and the choice to rest, to eat, to put on sunscreen, to drink water, to sleep, make those decisions, take care of yourself. There will always be work to do. There will always be tomorrow. Um, there will always be a solution to not having enough money, even though it doesn't feel like it. But making sure that your body will still help you and will still be here for you 15 years from now matter, especially if you want to be part of the larger fight, that bigger fight of changing the world that we live in. That fight is only worthwhile if we are here to be part of that change.
Jennifer, that's a very moving note to end on, and we have reached beyond 5 o'clock, and I don't want to push us into overtime. I'll close with a few thank yous to Giselle Girardo, who made this event physically and technically happen, to all of the participants who joined us. Thank you for being here, and a special shout out to a work colleague of mine who I haven't seen for too long, Bob Marshall. Nice to know that you were with us, Bob. And a reminder that next week, our next, the fourth in our 5-part series, looks at the employment challenges that disabled youth have. And I think you'll find that a very interesting and important session. So again, that will be next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. And most importantly, Jennifer Scott, thank you for the amazing organizing work that you're doing, and for a very inspiring and hopeful presentation about what can be done to improve the well-being of gig workers. So Jennifer, thank you for this.
Thank you for listening.
And a good evening ahead to all, and we hope you'll be with us in a week's time. Take care. Bye.